I think I have a reason to make this video. Are foldable phones worth buying in 2026? That's probably a reasonable question to ask. Is foldable phones in general are something that we're going into the next era of. In fact, phones like this are becoming more of a crucial point of people wanting to buy them and actually using these as a reasonable phone, even their main phone. The prices are more or less more reasonable against something like a baseline iPhone 17 Pro, and even something like the Fold 7 is fairly expensive, but part of it could mean a bigger screen. So let's just make one thing clear. The bar phone is something that has always been a thing ever since the original iPhone came out, especially nowadays in this 2020 generation. Bar phones have just been a regular, and foldable phones have kind of been on a side tangent, especially with the first sets of generations of foldable phones when they were mostly unreliable and very much underpowered. But nowadays in 2026, we see it as a case of these phones being reasonable enough to use on a regular basis, but then also being fairly inexpensive, especially against something like the regular iPhone 17 Pro against the Z Flip 7. Now, I know the biggest question people would ask: why would you buy a foldable phone against something with the stereotype of it being very unreliable and so being underpowered? Again, this is a stereotype that typically people bring up because, well, foldable phones, especially in the very beginning, were either seeming like a gimmick, but then either also being very unreliable and also very underpowered. We saw this with the original Fold back in 2019 after, in the hands of reviewers, it even broke from user error. The first sets of generations of foldable phones were more or less kind of in the sense of what stereotypes seem to make it out as: very unreliable and then very underpowered. But nowadays it seems like that most phones, the Z Flip and the Z Fold, the Google Pixel Foldable, and the Motorola Razr have come down to actually being fairly reasonable phones that you can actually use on a regular basis if you really wanted to. I even made the switch myself from this iPhone 12 to this Z Flip 6 that I bought couple weeks ago. I am a massive fan of the phone, but I will give a later review on the actual phone later on. The main thing that I should bring up with foldable phones is that there's a lot of people that ask the question, what's really the point of a foldable phone when a bar phone is basically so more reliable than foldable phones? And it's crucial to think about that too, especially when bar phones have become more or stand of a basically just a standpoint of basically the same things, either if it's an iPhone or a Samsung Galaxy or really any sort of brand nowadays. Considering the fact that foldable phones are actually one of the only real innovations right now with actually having to be able to close your phone up or actually having a bigger screen on the inside, it's a really big crucial detail to bring up that sometimes there's actually massive reasons why you should buy a foldable phone nowadays. I actually saw a video on Reddit that was basically somebody showing like 4 different phones: an iPhone, a Huawei, a Oppo, and even a OnePlus. All these phones having the same baseline of what really is the OS. And the biggest issue that I have with that is that phones aren't really innovating nowadays, at least based on the OS stance and even design sense. Like phones nowadays, this is the iPhone 12 from 2020, and the iPhone 17 Pro really looks like the same thing except just with a big chin on the top. You can consider the iPhone Air 2, which is about a couple $100, like at like $999, but the only real difference with that too is that it's thin, and even then people aren't really considering on buying thin phones like that, which is why I consider the idea of foldable phones being something that you should buy if you're wanting a new phone. To give some baseline of prices here, the regular 17 Pro is $1,099. That's also the same price of the Z Flip 7. The average prices of what would be the higher end flagship phones against the foldable phones, which is stuff like the Z Fold, the Motorola Razr, the Google Pixel Fold. The higher end flagship phones come down to $1,199, and the foldable flagships come down to $1,699 for the average prices. The Google Pixel Fold may seem like a good option, but the $1,799 price tag doesn't actually make up for its lack of quality thanks to jerry-rig everything, presenting how terribly built the actual phone is, especially under pressure. Which is why something like the Samsung Galaxy Z Flip would actually seem like a really good option. And a lot of people would ask, why would you get a Z Flip when it's basically just one screen and then you get another screen on the front? The Z Fold is something that people would consider more usable, but there's been cases where the actual Z Fold actually seems more or less underpowered than the actual Z Flip when it comes down to certain things, although you can be the one to choose if you choose the Z Flip or the Z Fold. I personally chose the Z Flip, and this is the Z Flip 6 from last year, and I really do love the Z Flip a lot. Like, I've actually been using this for the past couple of weeks and I am a fan. The nice thing about certain foldable phones is if you're especially wanting a foldable phone for a cheap price, you can get the last gen foldable phones for quite a discount, as I bought this Z Flip 6 from PlugTech for the price of $400. You can do the same thing with the Z Fold 2. Like, PlugTech has the same option, but it's around $600. Even something against a used iPhone 15 is more expensive than the Z Flip, so it's a little bit of a consideration. And even the last generations of foldable phones aren't even that underpowered, as even the current Z Fold 7, 256 gigabytes of storage base model with 12 gigabytes RAM and 16 gigabytes on the higher RAM model.
The Samsung Galaxy Z Fold 7 is powered by the Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Elite for Galaxy processor.
Now, the bar phones in themselves may seem like they're more of a better choice thanks to so-and-so reliability, but there's also another thing that also adds into it too, is the commitment that you have to make towards actually using a phone like this. And again, I've been using this for a couple weeks now, and I do really love it, but it's the main thing of you have to take care of these phones a lot better than what you would do with something like a regular iPhone, or even then something like the Samsung Galaxy or anything like that. Speaking of Apple and iPhones, there also is a case where Apple could be going into the foldable space too by this next year coming up. And that's also kind of why I'm making this video as well, is the fact that iPhones are going to be becoming a foldable factor as well in the foldable phone space, which could actually be a big deal, especially with so-and-so, this company actually bringing foldable phones for the first time in like 6 years since the very first sets of foldable phones. Now, if you decided to go with the foldable phone for your next phone, Samsung is a really good option. They've actually figured out a lot of the main specs with the phone, how to make it more reliable. The quality of these phones are really, really nice. Even the regular sets of generations of the foldable phones have just become so nice and so fast. The Motorola Razr is a decent option too. I actually do prefer the first gen Motorola Razr, especially with that looking like the OG Motorola Razr from 2003. The Google Pixel Fold may seem like a really good option. Again, although I brought up the whole thing with the quality control not being as nice and not as good as it was. It's an awful quality design, how they made the phone, and it actually kind of shows that Google doesn't know what they're doing with their foldable phones, at least for quality control sense. I'm not sure how Apple's foldable phone is going to be like if it comes out this next year. We will see how exactly it is and how they're going to be doing OS stuff. The big thing I would say is that this next year coming up is going to be a massive year for foldable phones. And if you do want to upgrade your phone to something like that, I think it's worth the price. The phones in themselves have become really nice and not as underpowered. The cameras in themselves are really, really good on most phones, especially Samsung's. The way that a lot of the processors are and the way that these phones are going to be like makes the phones a lot more interesting. Bar phones are kind of just the same thing over and over again if you really think about it. And even the S26 that's supposed to be coming out this next year is going to be kind of like the same thing as the iPhone 17 Pro with its similar design. Meanwhile, foldable phones have more of a case of actually being able to be more useful. They can actually be a lot better at certain features than even the bar phones will be. I do feel like that as a foldable phone user, I feel like there is a reason to switch to a foldable phone now, especially with last gen foldable phones being cheaper than the newest ones, which means you can get the prices and the phone in itself a lot better. Even if you had issues with the phone in itself, having a screen replaced or a screen protector replacement, because that tends to be a bit of an issue, you can pay from Samsung to get your screen protector replaced for about $20. And if you had bought it from Samsung, in your first year, you can get the first one for free, which is nice because that means that you don't have to really worry about that process of the screen protector becoming a massive issue. My point of advice is the main thing that you should consider if you do plan on buying a phone is definitely do consider on a foldable phone, prefer a Z Fold or a Z Flip or a Motorola Razr or a Google Pixel. The Google Pixel is more or less one that I would say stay away from, and the fact that I just dropped this is probably going to say a lot more about myself. Considering on a foldable phone is going to mean that there is a lot more of a sense of how this is going to work, because it's going to mean that you're going to be committing your time to taking care of the phone, and there's certain things that is worth having this phone for, and especially with the cameras, the processors, the RAM, the storage. The Z Flip may actually be like a really good option, although it really depends on how you see certain features. And bar phones have just become really boring. They're not really the same thing as they used to be a couple of years ago. It's just become a point where these phones have plateaued. Meanwhile, foldable phones have actually gotten more features, which actually makes more sense to why to buy these phones. And for me, I would say it's worth buying a foldable phone. Whatever you feel like is your best option, look into the options, and I will say thank you guys so much for watching this little video, this special video of how I did this stuff. Comment, like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys later when I talk about my actual foldable, my Z Flip 6, which I love this phone a lot.